Hi everyone, welcome back. The sun's shining today, so I'm up in my library. I have set up a place to decorate a mug using colored slip. I will be coloring this in and then putting it on a mug. I've been doing some short versions of this, posting just minute-long tutorials over the last couple months, but today I'm going to do a little bit of a longer version. I am all set up. I have some cardstock. Since I'm doing this on a wood table, it'll take a really long time to dry because this is coated. So essentially, this paper will have only one side to evaporate from. So if you want it to dry a little bit faster, you could put something more absorbent underneath, like this, and then work on there. That way it will absorb into this paper and it's absorbed into the atmosphere as well. I have some of my slip that I've made and tested out. I have some newer ones as well that you can use with a paintbrush. Squirt bottles seem to work a little bit easier. So first you just have to decide which colors you like the best. Here's an example. I did a darker color around the outside and then a lighter color in the middle. Same with the wings. It gives it kind of a fun effect. If you don't want to be that detailed, you can just go ahead and fill in almost like a coloring book, whatever colors you want. If you notice here, I did the same color, but one has more pigment, one has less. So that gives it a little bit of a gradient. It's actually really pretty, and I like doing that a lot. Just gives it a little bit more depth. So that's what I'll be doing today. So this is a color called Lobster. These are all US pigments. So what you want to remember when you're doing this is that the color you lay down first will be the color on top. So this is going to wrap like this. So this would be the first color, and then you do this color on top, and it's the opposite. So you'll see once I'm wrapping it around the mug later. So basically you just go and fill the areas that you want. I made all these, what do you call them, silk screens on an app called Procreate, and then I moved it into my Cricut app and printed it onto some iron-on adhesive, and then took some silk screen material and ironed it on so that you could kind of scrape underglaze through it and it would leave this, just the stencil basically. I can make a whole nother video for that too if you guys want to know how to do that. Okay, so moving on to the next color. Actually, that one's really light. Let's go with this one. This is for one of my kids' teachers. So I'm gonna do kind of girly colors. Her favorite color is purple. So I'm gonna do a lot of purples. This is lavender. The This one's a little bit more watery than the other ones. I found recently that I had glaze, clear glaze, that was not zinc free, and it really made my colors go kind of muddy. So I ordered some zinc free clear from Mako, and it made all the difference. So if you're finding that your colors aren't coming out as bright as you wanted them to, that might be a reason why, if you're not using zinc free clear. And I think that same thing happens when you're just doing underglaze as well, that if you don't use zinc free clear, that it can make it run and change the colors a little bit. So that was interesting. I'm gonna have to redo some of my test tiles because it really made the colors change a lot. Okay, that's purple. This is 20% lavender. Let's do 20% orchid. And even though there's a tiny bit of the image in like the top corners, you still want to get those just in case they go on your mug as well. They might not. This is a little bit bigger than what I need, but I'm still gonna put it on there just in case. All right, so then just fill in. And you don't want to go back once you get color laid on there, because this has so much water in it that it'll make this underglaze wet again, and then you could smear it. So once you get it on, just leave it alone. You could also do this with a paintbrush, but I think it takes a lot longer and you have to continuously keep dipping it, and I just do that for colors that I don't have in my squeeze bottles yet. You need to order a few more. You're gonna hear my birds in the background, I'm sure. It's not a bad sound though. Okay, let's do this. I'm gonna use as many purples as I can, and then I'm gonna do a couple yellows just to make things pop. Okay, that was 20% orchid. Now I'll go down to the 10% orchid, which will be the same color, just a little bit lighter. Not quite so saturated. You can always shake them up really good because the pigment tends to settle. This one, I accidentally pushed the metal tip down into the plastic part somehow. I don't know how I did that, but it still works. You just won't be quite as precise. But that's alright. This one's a little bit thicker than the other ones. Okay. And you can start layering on top of each other as soon as that first one is not glossy anymore. So it's kind of like when you go to glaze, you can put the next layer on when it's not wet anymore, but it doesn't have to be completely dry. Okay, let's see, maybe these little feet. And then let's see what color. Let's do this. Yellow's really pretty. This turns into like this color. It's pretty bright. This body of this is this 20%. Let's do this thorax in the butt. And then I'll do this part, the lighter yellow. Let's do this the same. Alright, that was 20%, this is 10. Then, let's see. The Saturn orange is really pretty. That's what's in this wings. If you can tell the difference between the yellow and the orange. It's just a slight difference. This orange and yellow right here too. Orange versus yellow. I think I might do this on this caterpillar. Do this last, the body of the caterpillar. I think this is called Alpine Rose. Pinks burn off. I fire my stuff to a cone 6 usually, and pinks tend to burn off pretty quickly the higher you get in your firings. So this barely has any pink to it once it gets fired. I haven't tested it out yet, but I'm hoping that zinc-free clear maybe will help keep some of that pigment as well. But that's something I have to test out. No. I'll wait for this to dry, to be about almost like a leather hard consistency, where you should be able to touch it a little bit without it sticking to your finger. Once it reaches that, then I cover the whole thing in this white color that I have. I'll bring that up and show you as well. And then here's the mug I'm going to be putting it on. You want it trimmed, not handled yet. And I'll show you how to wrap it around the outside of that once it's dry enough. In the meantime, while I'm waiting for that to dry, I'm going to work on personalizing my mug by putting the teacher's name on it. Last year, I made a mug for the gym teacher, art teacher, music teacher, and then all my kids' teachers, as well as the helping teacher that's in there. This year I'm just doing their actual teachers. Because I started a little late and I don't think I'm gonna have time to do them all. Okay. Since I'm doing this on plastic, I'm gonna just tape it to the bag so that it doesn't slide around as much. Like that. Okay. I just picked a font. I use a website called dafont, DAFONT.com, and then just take a screenshot and print it out. So I liked this one. I'm gonna go over the outside with my needle tool just to make an indent, and then I will carve it out a little bit better and make it more like this. I'm gonna carve this one out even a little bit more before I stick it on their cup. And I'm pushing relatively hard. When you carve something in and use plastic, it makes this nice impression without getting like that chunkiness that you would get without. So that's something that I learned really helps keep it nice and clean. I also found that dragging your pointer down instead of up helps. I think down is just an easier, smoother motion. Once you're confident that you got all your parts, take it off. And like I said, it's really just an impression at that point. I don't know if you can see it. Let me see if I can zoom in. Okay, so then I will take it out of the bag. And I'll say it's a little bit softer than leather hard. And I know it's upside down as well. Then you can go over it again if you want. I think I might wait for it to dry a little bit more before I start carving it out. Maybe I'll work on Mr. Eccles. His is pretty dry. I started his yesterday. But as you can see, the difference between tracing with plastic, this is the second time I went over it, and now I'm gonna take this little tool. Oops. I'm gonna take this tool, ouch, and just carve out the outlines. And like I said, the same thing, dragging down works better than up, I find. I'm just more steady with a downstroke than an upstroke, but you do whatever you gotta do to make it stable. So the biggest thing you want to remember is that this blue underglaze will smear really easy. For some reason it dries slower than the rest of it. And so drying time is really the biggest issue I've found. When you go to put it on, if it's not dry enough, that blue will smear everywhere. So now you just want to coat it in a nice thick coat of white and smooth it out. And I'm not putting any pressure. I'm not scraping it off once I get it on. I'm just smoothing it out, trying to make it one continuous layer all over the paper so that it dries at the same rate and it's not see-through and it's not streaky. And it will start to wrinkle a little bit. But like I said, I'm not putting any pressure on it. I'm just putting a nice thick layer on, hopefully saturating the whole thing with the same amount of water from the slip. And then you can kind of stretch it out a little bit. Just try to get some of those wrinkles out. If you leave the wrinkles on, then you get more air bubbles and it's harder to put on your cup. And you leave it like that until it's all matte. And when you touch it, it doesn't stick. I'll show you a couple different drying times. There is, once it's matte, sometimes if you touch it, you can peel part of it off with your finger. You want to let it dry until that doesn't peel off, so it's nice and stable, so you can kind of touch it and manipulate it as you need. So I will let that dry for the next little while, and then we will put it on our cup. Here's our cup. You want to make sure that this is still relatively wet. I would say for me, this was pretty wet when I trimmed it. And I found that if your mug is too dry, this has a really hard time sticking to it. And then you have to get this more wet, which then causes your lines to be a little bit more blurry if it doesn't come off as easily. So this, just make sure is like just leather hard. Personally, that's what I found anyway. So like I can still like easily put my fingernail into the bottom of that without, but it's not like super smushy. In the meantime, while I'm letting that dry, I am gonna slip and score Mr. Eccles' name. He's not getting butterflies on his mug, so I just added the handle. And I'm just gonna, before I put the slip on, I'm actually gonna bend it to the cup so that it does a better job staying and it doesn't want to pull away as it dries. So I'm probably just gonna put it right there in the middle. Oops. And then I like to go around and just kind of mark where it's gonna go, so I remember. Score it just a little bit. Oops. It's still pretty soft, but this is getting dry, so I want to get it on there before it cracks. I already saw one little spot where it may have cracked a little bit because it's getting a little dry. So then take my slip, I'm going to put it on just one side so it doesn't goo out everywhere. that will help soften it back up a little bit too. Let it kind of sink in there for a couple seconds. Just like that. It's already starting to crack just a tiny bit on that C, so I'll add some slip there just to moisten it up a little bit and fill in any cracks. And then I personally wait till this slip around here gets a little bit harder before I scrape it off, because then I can kind of smush it back into the crack there. And since it is getting a little drier, I'm gonna get the edges just a little wet and kind of smooth it out so that there's nothing sharp poking out. Oops. Like that. And I'll just let that be for a little bit. When I go to do this mug that I'm putting the slip design on, I'm actually not going to use this brown slip, even though it matches the mug and it matches the handle. I find that when you use brown slip, it gets the picture that you're putting on there really messy. So I use just a bottle of white slip that I have made that's exactly the same as the picture that's going to go on there. So I'll show you that once I go to put the handle on. So now I can touch it without it sticking to me. It's a little bit wet still, but okay. So I have tried to roll it like this before, and sometimes I find that it goes at a diagonal without meaning to, so I'm gonna try setting it like this and wrapping it around. Turn it and let it hang limply so that I can try to get the bubbles out without it sticking and crumpling up too much. You want to start in the middle and work your way out. And then I usually look and see which side I want to be. They're gonna overlap a little bit. So this side has some image, this one doesn't. So I'm gonna have this one be on the cup. Look, I didn't line it up very good either, so it's starting to not line up at the bottom, but maybe I could stretch it. Okay. This is the most difficult part. Oh, and this will be perfect because this is, then gonna overlap this and kind of cover that up. And luckily there's no image there. So it should be just white. Okay. Now I just go around and try to kind of get all the bubbles out before I take my roller to it. A lot of times the bubbles will get trapped along this line where you can, I don't know if you can see it, but this is a little bit more raised than the white part. So I'll go along those raised parts where the color starts, because that's where I've found most of my bubbles to be. And I can kind of tell that it's not sticking the greatest. So I have a wet sponge that sometimes I'll go around, I'm gonna go rinse it off, but I'll go around and get this white, just the white part wet, just so it releases from the paper a little bit easier. So I'll go do that real quick. Okay, I also found this pill bottle that I'm gonna put in to kind of keep our mug nice and straight, not warped. Okay, now I know that my white sections are not sticking the greatest. So you want to get it a little bit wet, not too wet, because the underglaze will then smear when you go to smush it on. A lot of times the parts where you put the colored slip is going to be a little bit more wet already because it's a little thicker. I'm sure you could put it on a little thinner and it would be perfect, but using the squeeze bottles, it just comes out kind of fast. Alright, so I'm going to try to get some of the bubbles out again, gently. I'm not really putting any pressure on, just trying to stick it, basically. Getting it wet a little bit makes the paper a little bit more pliable as well, so it molds to the cup a little easier. Okay. Don't forget to go all the way to the top, like that part's not gonna stick very well because I didn't get that wet. Okay. So then you take this tool, I believe it's called a brayer, and you go around and you just roll it all over, all top edge to bottom edge, and it helps to kind of smooth these raised parts into the white sections. So there's a big bubble there. And wherever you see a bubble, you'll know that it's gonna peel off. So if you don't get the bubble out, that is not gonna stick to the mug at all. It'll just leave a blank space, which actually can look pretty cool, but you want to be intentional with it, I think. So like I said, you're just kind of flattening out the image gently. You can push moderately hard since you have a form inside holding the shape of the mug. And don't forget to go over this piece, because remember it's overlapping all the way to here. So you want to make sure that you get all of that under there on as well. And then I go back around and just do the edges again, just to make sure that everything is adhered. And then you can test a section out. Looks like it's doing pretty good. So the cool thing is you can either leave this where it's kind of peeled up, or you could go back. I add a tiny bit more water because it seems to go faster. And then push it down again. And sometimes it will be gone. So it depends if you want a really nice coverage or if you want to go back and make it look more almost like that antique-y look. I prefer full coverage. Oops, but that's just me. Messed up my handle. So like I said, add a little bit more water. Moderate pressure. Scrape. Much better. I even adhered it to my bottle. That needs a little bit more water. So that was like right here. I also try not to touch, well, I guess that's just white. Sometimes if this is still a little wet and you put your hands in it, you'll make it more into a stamp. So I try not to touch the colored parts. And it really just does take practice. The first couple times I tried these, I kept getting the paper too wet or not waiting long enough for it to dry, and my line work would just smear every time. And it's really frustrating because you put so much time adding the color, and I was adding a lot of detail, and then I was just too impatient, and it kept getting messed up. So this is that overlapping part, and that's kind of harder to get re-wet because it's gonna have that barrier. And instead of using the scraper here, I'll try this out. And remember, that's paper, so that doesn't matter. We're just trying to get it to adhere. Let's see if that worked. Yep, that's better. So that's it. And then you can go back and like smooth that out. I tend to wait a little bit longer so it's not textured, but I would take this tool once it's a little bit drier and kind of drag it along to blend that seam back in. That's better. Same with anything like up here. You can blend that in if you want, but I kind of like the way that looks. So I got nice crisp color lines, which I don't usually, but I am impressed this time I did. And then I take it out of here, if you can. And then wait for this to dry, and you can just like crack these off, basically. And you can reform it if your rim got messed up. Take a little bit bigger of a thing and make it go in there. So yeah, I'll wait till that dries just a little bit, and then I'll add the name and her handle. Now I have to decide where I'm going to put my handle. And I think where that seam was, where it's just kind of a blank white space, is going to be my choice. So it's going to be just like attaching any other handle. Just a little bit. Better. And like I said before, I'm going to use my white slip that matches the outside white slip on the mug. Put it on there. placement before I put it on all the way. Looks pretty good. Check it from all angles. I have a plant pot in there right now, trying to preserve the rim. But now I can put some pressure on. Same with the bottom. I always hold it from the inside because it tends to warp if you don't. Smoosh it on there. Make sure it stayed the right shape that you want. That looks pretty good. You didn't push it one way or the other, which I usually do. And then, oh, see how I can just knock these guys off. And then personally, I have found that if I let this slip dry, it's easier to blend in and you don't get as much cracking. I've had some issues with cracking when doing this because this slip is different than this clay. So it'll dry at different rates, and I don't know, I've just found that it cracks a lot. So I think that leaving that slip on there makes a better connection between the white clays. And if you twist this pot in there, it won't stick as much. So that just makes the rim go back to being circle. And then I'll just let it dry there for a couple minutes. If you leave this pot in there while it dries, this will shrink and crack. And I've had that happen before too. So I would just suggest leaving it like that. Cleaning up your mess, and while you're waiting, that will dry, and then we can add the name on the front. Okay, for the sake of time, my handle isn't done drying yet, but I'm gonna put the name on it while it's drying. So, here's the name. I painted it. Turned out really cute. Don't know if she's right or left-handed, so I'm just gonna go with right. And it's actually nice because there's a nice blank white space here, so I'm not going to cover up too much of the art. And I think I should just put it in the middle. Should we go at the bottom? No. I think top middle. Right there. Okay. And since this white is already pretty wet, I'm not even gonna score it. I'm just gonna use a small line, sort of like glue. You can see that. And then I'm gonna, just slap it on there. And that will dry about the same rate as the handle, and I can come back through and clean all that up and just scrape it off. The most important parts that might dry flat are these edges, so I always give those just a little bit extra push to make sure that they stay down. Maybe we can clean this up a little bit where I just messed that up. You can see this, there's a tiny little crack by the W. You can just kind of like rub it back together. Hopefully that will stay. Might show, but it kind of just adds to the whimsy of the piece since it's already a little bit, I don't know, antiqued, I guess. All right, so we'll let that dry and then I'll come back through and just scrape that off once it's a little more dry. Same with this. I'll blend that in and I'll blend the white into the handle so that the brown doesn't go onto the mug. Okay, for the handle I have this, oops, it's a little dirty. This tool, I think it's a polymer clay tool. And I will just scrape off the excess. You can use any smoothing tool. And I tried to bring the white slip that I put on there up the handle so that the brown doesn't take over the white. It's a little bit harder to use this tool on the inside. Same thing on the top. Even it out. And then I'll take my smooth sponge and kind of just smooth everything into each other. Again, trying not to get too much of the brown clay onto the white. But you can go back through and gently wipe it off. And I'll clean it up a little bit better when I'm off camera. But see, like that little brown streak, you can kind of just wipe it away. I call these types of like really smooth sponges my erasers because it just takes away that top layer. Okay, and the same goes for this. So now that it's hard, you can just kind of scrape it off without smearing it all over the place. Just like that. And same thing here. These tools are really nice because they come in a variety, but if you can tell, it's got kind of a bevel to it. So you can use this back side to smear it in or the bevel side to scrape it off. Like that. Once it's the consistency that you want and you get enough off, you can take your eraser sponge and go back and tidy it up. Looks pretty good. So there's that. There's a whole mug. Kind of fun. Takes a long time, but it's worth it. And then I'll also go back and clean up this edge, just like a rib tool. Scrape off all the white. And once you get it all off, you can just go through and erase. So it's sort of like that. That's it. And then I'll biscuit, glaze the inside, clear glaze the outside, and it'll be done.